Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining today's Key Biodiversity Areas in Ontario Progress and Next Steps webinar. We're all really excited, I think, to give this session and update everyone on the progress to date. It's been almost a year since the last webinar in Ontario, so it's been a fantastic year, really great, and yeah, we're all really excited to share. My name is Peter Soroye. I am the Key Biodiversity Area Assessment and Outreach Coordinator at WCS Canada. And I'll be kind of the moderator and give a little bit of an introduction to the KBAs this morning. I'm coming from traditional unceded territory in Algonquin, traditional unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa, Ontario. Really happy to recreate and live on these lands and waters. And I hope everybody, it's a beautiful day where I am, a little cloudy, but still nice. And I hope everyone gets a chance to get outside at some point today, either in a Key Biodiversity area or elsewhere. A couple of housekeeping items for today before we get started. We'll be recording the talk today. The recording is started already, and so you should have got a notification about that. Keep that in mind if you don't want to appear on the recording. Just keep yourself muted and keep your camera off. You'll note that you can't turn your camera on or unmute yourself at the moment. As soon as we get through the presentations today, you'll have that ability and you'll be able to ask questions and turn your camera on if you'd like to do so. If you don't want to, please drop any questions that you get throughout the presentations or later into the chat box. We'll answer those throughout the presentations and or get to them at the end of the talk as well. So do use that chat box if you'd like. And finally, we are recording the talk, and so we'll send a copy of the recording out to everybody who's registered on the Eventbrite. If you're not on the Eventbrite, you can check out the recording on our website, kbacanada.org. It'll be uploaded within a couple of days after today. And without further ado, let's jump into it and get started. I'll introduce my co-presenters here today in turn as they go up for their presentations. But to start off, I'll give a little bit of an introduction or a refresher to the KBA Canada program. So I'm sure everybody has maybe a passing familiarity with KBAs already. If you don't, no worries, because I'm going to start off with just the most basic elements. So key biodiversity areas, or KBAs, are sites that contribute significantly to the persistence of biodiversity. That's a really specific definition, and I wanted to leave it on here because KBAs are quite a specific thing. KBAs are one way of mapping out important areas for nature. It's a way that incorporates a lot of previous approaches that we had before. Previously, when we wanted to identify important areas for nature, we might use things like Birds Canada's important bird and biodiversity areas. We might use important plant areas or prime butterfly areas or important reptile and amphibian areas. There are a lot of different tools and approaches that we use that all have a lot of utility and have been super helpful in the past. KBAs try to wrap up a lot of these different species-specific or taxa-specific tools into a single under a single umbrella. And so KBAs allow us to identify important areas for the survival of species and ecosystems and the persistence of ecosystems across lands and waters and oceans. KBAs are an international tool, and so they're standardized, and the way that we identify KBAs in Canada is the same way we identify them in Australia or Mozambique. And so there's this tool synthesizes a lot of previous approaches and gives us a single way of identifying important areas that helps to synthesize information for conservation and feed into a variety of different processes. KBAs are a really quantitative tool, and so we identify KBAs using very quantitative and objective criteria based on in most cases, the number or percentage of populations or extent of ecosystems at sites. I've left on here the 5 different main criteria that we use to identify KBAs in Canada and internationally. Most of the KBAs we have identified to date are identified for either threatened or rare species or for sites that are important for the biological processes of species, thinking of places that are important for migration or hibernation for different species. The key biodiversity area standards are quite broad, like I mentioned, and so biodiversity includes not only species, but also ecosystems. We can think here of alvar ecosystems or grassland ecosystems in Southern Ontario. And we also have some criteria like for ecological integrity that are not criteria that we've applied yet, but will eventually identify sites that are important for the broader functioning of landscapes and ecosystems. So in Ontario in the far north and the rest of northern Canada, for example, we'll probably have a lot of these sites for ecological integrity, places that are really important for sustaining ecosystem function across really broad spaces. And Canada will be quite unique among other countries in having quite a few of these sites for ecological integrity. Some of the cool things about KBAs, they're agnostic to species, and my co-presenters will jump into that more later, but we can highlight charismatic species like caribou, but also really unlikely species, mussels and vertebrates, spiders and other things. And so the KBAs are really neat in how they allow us to highlight some of Ontario and Canada's really unique biodiversity. Finally, identifying these KBAs doesn't bring any automatic protections, but it does give us the information that we can use to inform different conservation decisions. And so KBAs are a really flexible tool in that regard. They can be used for a lot of different approaches and purposes. Why are we doing this work to identify KBAs across Canada? Well, of course, across the country and elsewhere in the world, biodiversity is in decline, and KBAs are a scientifically robust and credible tool that captures a broad range of biodiversity values, and it can form a large range of conservation decisions and actions. There's a lot of interest in Canada at the federal level to include KBAs in protected area planning. And in different regions across the country, a lot of interest in using key biodiversity areas to inform land use planning or to feed into different prioritization tools for land use acquisition and other things. We're exploring to see how KBAs can support Indigenous-led conservation as well. We think there's a large ability for KBAs to help support management plans or proposals for Indigenous protected and conserved areas, among other things, for example. And of course, at the global and national level, understanding where these important areas for nature are across the country is really important for informing systematic conservation and understanding the effectiveness of protected area networks. In Canada, KBAs are one of the ways that will help to identify the areas most important to protect as we try to reach our 30 by 30 protection of lands and waters across Canada international targets. And so there's a lot of interest in using the KBAs. This throughout the other presentations as well, but identifying KBAs is a truly collaborative effort. There are 3 organizations leading the work to identify KBAs across Canada, and these are WCS Canada, Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, Birds Canada, and Nature Reserve Canada. These 3 groups are each playing independent and really important roles in the program and are all working very tightly together. But there's a whole group of other organizations as well, the KBA Canada Coalition, which are supporting the work, which are people who are interested in using the products and have contributed already a lot of time and energy to help identify these areas as well. And of course, behind these agencies and organizations, there are hundreds of different experts who have also contributed their time and expertise to help identify KBAs. There's no new survey work that goes into identifying KBAs. It depends entirely on existing information. And so experts are really crucial, and knowledge holders are really crucial in helping us to figure out where these areas are across the country. And outside of Canada, there's also a global KBA program which helps provide support and guidance and is developing some of these other criteria which haven't been applied yet in Canada. I'm going to pass it over now to my colleagues so they can talk more about Ontario. But before I do, I just want to show some of the work that we've done to date across the rest of the country outside of Ontario, including the existing important bird areas which are being reassessed as KBAs, and the new KBAs that we've identified. We have well over 800 sites for species identified across the country. This is just a really quick draft map of some of the areas that we're investigating. To be added to this are still KBAs for ecosystems, which we're doing a lot of work across the prairies to identify, and eventually those areas that are important for ecological integrity, which I mentioned previously as well. So a lot more sites to be added. We're discovering more and more every day, and it's really exciting to be building this comprehensive picture of KBAs across the country. Want to investigate some of these sites either in Ontario or elsewhere, I'd encourage you to check out our interactive KBA dashboards. On kbacanada.org, you can find this interactive dashboard, which is showing some of the new sites that we're identifying for different plants, mammals, and amphibians, reptiles, and vertebrates. You can also check out Birds Canada's IBA-to-KBA.org website if you're interested in looking at sites that are important for birds as well. And Amanda will talk a lot more about that shortly. But do check out this interactive dashboard if you're interested in looking at where we're investigating across the country. If you'd like to learn more, do check out our website or email me or any of the other presenters here today. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Amanda Bichel, who is the KBA coordinator for Birds Canada, and she'll talk more about the work that Birds Canada is doing in Ontario.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So like Peter said, I am Amanda Bichel. I'm the KBA coordinator for Birds Canada, and I recently transitioned into this role from the Ontario Important Bird Biodiversity Areas coordinator. So this is a good presentation for me to give. So I just want to acknowledge that I live and work and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Nakota Nations, and Métis Nation, and all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And this is completely new to me because I just moved to Calgary. So it was interesting for me to kind of research that. And I know I have so much more to learn about that. Also, Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems. So we support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous people to care for the land. And next slide. So Peter has my slides, so I'm just going to be kind of looking back and forth, so forgive me. So just a quick overview of what IBAs are, just to remind everyone, if you didn't know already. They're a suite of designated sites which are part of a global program. And our main goals are to identify those sites, which was done a while ago, monitor them for population trends, and conserve them when possible, all with help from community members. So IBs, really similar to KBAs, are non-governmental, non-regulatory, meaning they're not recognized as protected by law in Canada, and they can range from tiny patches to huge tracts of land or water, and they're on any type of land, including urban, rural, private, public, parks, and etc. Unfortunately, in Canada, over half of our IBAs have no protection whatsoever. Next slide. So just a bit of a history. The IBA program was established with Nature Canada as our BirdLife partner, and close to 600 IBAs were identified in the 90s. We have national IBA coordinators in most provinces. A few are from Birds Canada, like me for Ontario, but most are from nature organizations like Alberta Nature. And we also have a caretaker program. I see a few caretakers on the call, so thanks for joining. And this is really how we get anything done on the ground. So they're kind of our on-the-ground stewards, and they carry out conservation actions when needed at the sites. Next slide, please. So along with everything you see written here, there are more than 13,000 IBAs globally in almost every country, and they include terrestrial and marine sites worldwide. And they've been working on IBAs globally around 40 years. So all this to say that the IBAs are really great forerunners and a great foreground for setting up the KBA program. And actually about 75% of the world's KBAs identified to date are in fact IBAs that have been reassessed as KBAs. So it's a really important starting point. Next slide. So quickly, in Canada, we use two criteria to designate IBAs, and one of them is for species at risk, and the other is for large aggregation of birds, and both of them qualify by meeting a minimum 1% of the bird's population. Next slide. And I won't go into this too much because Peter kind of covered it, but kind of the point here is that it's really adding on such value to the two thresholds that we used for birds. So we're getting now, you know, ecosystem types in there and all other species, threatened and aggregates as well. So it's really valuable adding this information onto our sites. Next slide. So Peter kind of went over WCS Canada's assessing all other species sites and delineating new sites, and NatureServe Canada, they've take care of a database, and they have really handy eBar maps that we use as well. And then a few things that Birds Canada does is integrating the database with NatureServe and WCS Canada, creating a new website and registry with the partners as well. And then the IBA-to-KBA crosswalk, which is an analysis to determine which IBAs in Canada will become candidate KBAs. And that's what I'll talk about next. So this is Dean here. First, I'll say that we're really one of the first countries to do this work. So there wasn't really a process. Basically, Dean figured it all out. And we harvested bird data from Nature Counts, which is basically our warehouse of data that Birds Canada runs. And it includes all of Birds Canada's programs like Christmas bird count, Great Backyard Bird Count, atlases, everything like that. And we integrate eBird data into that as well. So we pulled all of that data. That was 17 million records in IBAs. And then we updated all the population estimates using BirdLife International, Partners in Flight, and COSEWIC. And then we used those data to test the criteria both globally and nationally, using the KBA, the new KBA criteria for aggregations and species at risk. So for this crosswalk, we used we found 50,000 records that met thresholds in around 450 IBAs across Canada. Next slide, and I'll show you those IBAs. So just to explain the colors here a little bit, the red are national sites. The blue are, can't really see it very well because the blue, not the blue highlighted sites, but the blue sites are national. And then the ones highlighted are data deficient. So I'll explain a bit more about that later. And then the gray ones we have really no data for at all that qualifies to become KBAs. Next slide. So this is, I'm just going to move my notes, sorry. These are the results in Ontario. So of the presumptive 51 KBAs, so sites that qualify to become KBAs or had data, 23 of them are data deficient. So this means that data are older than 12 years old. There are only 1 or 2 years of observations that met the threshold in the last 12 years. So basically it's out of date, or we just don't have enough years of it. And those are the sites that are outlined in blue. Next slide. Yeah, so I just kind of zoomed into different parts of Ontario here just to show you kind of the status of a lot of the places. So this is southwestern Ontario, obviously, and there's a few data deficient sites, but most of the sites in southwestern Ontario are global and have plenty of data because there's lots of birders and lots of people surveying and doing lots of work in there. So pretty good shape. And then next slide, please. Thanks. And this is a bit different. There's an area up like in Manitoulin Island and around the Georgian Bay where we don't have a lot of data. So there's a lot of data deficient sites and there's a lot of sites that we just don't have any data for. So it's a little bit different. But also in Eastern Ontario, there's lots of good data there as well because we have surveys going on and a few of them are actually new sites. So. Okay, and then this is the last, the last slide. So this is up in the James and Hudson's Bay, and we've talked to a few people up there and are still kind of trying to collect some more data. We know that these blue outlined ones are still really important for birds. We just have to try to get our hands on the data. And then the ones up near Kenora are data deficient as well. And I think we actually might have a source of data for, I think, pelicans up there. So anyways, those are the kind of things we're working on just trying to get the newest data that we possibly can from other sources outside of nature counts. Next slide. Okay, so some ongoing work. So in IBA specifically, we'll be, like I said, updating data deficient sites with new bird data wherever we can find it. So we're reaching out to bird experts. A lot of CWS data has really helped in informing especially some northern sites that we didn't have data for before. And we're also reviewing sites for nominations. So we're asking experts and people who know the sites to comment on boundaries and site summary and numbers and everything like that. And then we're also working with WCS to make boundary changes where overlaps of existing and new KBAs kind of come together. And then we're integrating all species into one nomination form and nominating them to become KBAs. And then last slide. So how can you help? If you are interested, you can contact me if you think that you have any data that's not on nature counts, especially for those IBAs that were outlined in blue. And you can help review sites. Like I said, we're sending out reviews soon to try to get as much information and as much people to comment on them as possible. And also you can pass along contacts for anyone you think might have additional data or an interest in any of the sites that you saw. And I can share the map link if anyone's interested, unless Peter did that already, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's all I have for today, and thanks for listening. I'm excited to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Amanda. Terrific presentation. And yeah, we're all looking forward to a lot of question and discussion period after the other presentations today. So either hold your questions for that or drop them in the chat and we will address them in the question and discussion period or before. I'd like to introduce Robyn Rumney, who is our Ontario KBA coordinator at WCS Canada and is leading the work to identify new sites for non-bird species across Ontario. Robyn, take it away.
Thanks, Peter. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking with you today from Treaty 16 territory, which is home of the Huron-Wendat, Mississauga, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee nations. So today I'm going to give you an update on our scoping of non-bird Key Biodiversity Areas, or KBAs, in Ontario. So I'm with the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada. So our work here is basically integrating with Birds Canada to find what other taxa are in these sites and other sites. Next slide, please, Peter. So just to give you an overall summary of our work to date in Ontario, so it's about a year in. We started off with a long list of almost 1,000 species in Ontario, and this is based off of the number of species at risk, rare species, and geographically restricted species. So after scoping these, we've found more than 200 species and varieties and populations and designatable units included within that term today. But we found over 200 that are concentrated enough to potentially meet KBA criteria in Ontario. And these are spread across multiple taxa, which include plants, reptiles, amphibians, fish, mussel, lichens, insects, mammals. So across most taxa, we at least have one species that we're scoping. And overall, these different species are looking like they could be found in over 90 different KBAs. So some KBAs could be just for one species, and in some of our far southern Ontario sites, we have up to 20 trigger species within a single site. And of these over 90 that we're working on, we have 8 that have completed technical review and are ready for general review. We have another set that will be entering technical review very shortly, and then a few that are just in early stages of scoping as well. And just keep in mind that this number of KBAs and also trigger species will continue to change because as we get expert input and new information, the conservation ranks can change nationally or globally. We can get new information. Or we could learn that perhaps it's more widespread than we thought. So it might sites and species can be added and removed to this list as we work. Next slide, please. So our methods in Ontario to date for this adding this additional taxa has been primarily species-based. So as Peter mentioned, there's 5 criteria for designating KBAs. And in Ontario, so this work is just looking at the species. So in future, we will also be looking to find ecosystem-based and ecological integrity KBAs, but everything that I'm presenting on today is just on that first set of criteria. Our methods are also using data from many different sources. So I can see just in the participant list today, a large number of you have shared data sets or reports or papers or expert input through meetings or emails. So I really, really appreciate it. And it's been really instrumental to our work. So based on all of this data that we've been given and gathered, we've mapped this across the province. And we've been looking for areas where individual species are concentrated, which might meet KBA criteria. And then we've also been looking for areas that have a really high number of species, just because this increases the chances that one or more of these species might meet KBA criteria. Our approach has also been extremely collaborative. So I mentioned that we've had so much data come in and knowledge from different sources. And we've also done quite a bit of outreach. We ran expert input meetings. We had a really successful reptile and amphibian expert meeting in the fall that gave us a lot of information. And we've met with different site and species experts and public groups and to gather as much input as possible. And we're going to continue to keep this as collaborative a process as we can over the next year as well. Next slide, please. So this map here with the blue circles shows the different non-bird KBAs that we're looking at so far in Ontario. As I mentioned, this is some of these sites might be in early stages, so dots could be added and removed from this map. You can see that there's a clear trend towards the south of the province, and this is just because using the species-based approach so far, the number of species increases as we move south, and also the number of species at risk. So as Amanda transitions IBAs to KBAs, I'm sure there'll be more in the north for Birds Canada, and also as we start to look at ecosystem sites in the north. But right now, most of the sites I'm going to be talking about are a bit further south. Next slide, please. Just for a matter of time today, I'm going to talk about 4 broad areas where we're actively looking into multiple KBAs. And then in the discussion, we can answer any questions about individual sites or anything that we've missed today. So I'm going to talk about these 4 areas pictured towards the south. Next slide, please. So the first region is southeastern Ontario. So this includes the Frontenac Axis, which is an outcrop of the Canadian Shield that extends south and across the St. Lawrence River connects with the Adirondack Mountains. So this is an area that has quite a large variety of ecosystems, and as such also has a large variety of species and rare species. So a species of significance in this region is the gray rat snake, the Great Lakes St. Lawrence population, and it's nationally restricted to this part of Ontario. So after meeting with reptile experts in the fall, they recommended that we look at multiple sites, or we look at sites within this where it's most concentrated. So right now we're looking into sites such as Murphy's Point, Charleston Lake, Frontenac Forest, and maybe Thousand Islands for this species. And there are other rare species that could trigger KBAs in this region as well, such as in the Puzzle Lake area. Pictured in the bottom left there's a rare plant called toothcup, and this site's entered technical review for the presence of this species. And this part of the province, we're working closely with the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Region and also Thousand Islands National Park. So thanks to those partners for sharing their knowledge and expertise, and we're looking forward to continuing this work. Next slide. So another area that we're really active is kind of the lower Great Lakes region. So there are a bunch of sites along Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, where we have aquatic, wetland, and shoreline KBAs. Many of these are kind of the big, well-known IBAs, such as Rondeau, Long Point, Point Pelee, Dundas Valley, and Dundas Marsh. And what we're doing is we're looking to see what other rare and at-risk and geographically restricted species we can add into these KBA nominations. So for just this part of Ontario has a really high species richness and lots of rare and at-risk species. So we're working closely with Birds Canada on these, and we're also making sure that the final KBA delineations are appropriate both for the birds and for these new triggers that we're adding. And we're working with lots of partners in these regions as well, and we're looking forward to having some of these KBAs officially designated because we're imagining that the species list will be quite long for some of these. Next slide. So another area is southwestern Ontario and the rivers. So these are areas such as the Sydenham River, the Thames River, the Osable River, the Grand River, and more. And this is an area that has extremely high diversity of freshwater mussels and also has quite a few rare fish species, and in the floodplains, rare reptiles and plants as well. So this is also an area that has really high agricultural coverage on the landscape and a low remaining natural cover, particularly in some of these subwatersheds. And despite this, actually the East Sydenham River watershed has the highest freshwater mussel diversity of any watershed in Canada. So we think it's really important to designate these sites as a KBAs, recognizing that kind of incredible diversity in this highly impacted landscape. And quite a few of these sites are almost ready for technical review. We're just waiting for final input before. So many of you experts and site holders in southwestern Ontario can look forward to opportunities to review if you're interested very soon. Next slide. So the last region I wanted to mention was the Manitoulin Island region. So in this area, there's an island just south of Manitoulin, Great Duck Island, that we just put through technical review for some rare plant and a grasshopper species. And we have other sites on Manitoulin Island and Coburn Island on the islands north of Manitoulin, where there's rare dune, beach, forest, grassland, and alver habitats. So we've met with a site expert and species expert in this area, and we don't have any sort of final decisions on the island itself, but we're really looking forward to having one or more big KBAs in this region. So if you have any input on this, please reach out, and we're really excited about diving into this work later this spring. Next slide, please. So the next steps for our work is first and foremost just to continue the scoping work. So of these 90 that I mentioned, we're working actively on 40 or so, and we have quite a few that we still have to confirm or remove from the list, and many more that we'll also continue to add. And once this is done, we're going to continue to delineate sites. So this is done in concert with Birds Canada and also different agencies and experts for each of the individual sites. And if you're interested in any of the individual delineations or what we're thinking, just reach out, or if you have any suggestions as well. We'll also be putting many more KBAs through review, so both technical and general review. And we're looking forward to getting input from all parties for all of these sites. And then after that, these sites will be nominated by either the global or the national secretariats, or both, depending on if they're global or national in scale. And our timeline for this work is to hope to have it done by next spring, so about a year from now. Next slide. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or comments or want to get involved or give input, you can reach out by email, and also in the discussion period, I'm happy to chat more about individual sites or regions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Robyn. Excellent presentation. Really great to hear the updates. And thanks everyone for dropping the questions in the chat. We'll get to those either at the question and discussion period or earlier if we're managed to, if we can. We had a third presenter here today as well, Jonathan Choquette from the Wildlife Preservation Canada. And he wasn't able to make it today, but sent a video. We're excited to have him present because, of course, we're not the only people that can propose KBAs. Anybody can propose a KBA or work with us to help with the KBA, as Amanda and Robyn both mentioned. So if there's a place that you're particularly interested in or that you know is special and think might meet KBA criteria, do reach out. In the case of Ojibway Prairie Complex and Greater Park Ecosystem, the team at Wildlife Preservation Canada led the work to nominate the KBA. And so I'll let them describe kind of the work behind that and why they did it. Let me share my screen and play the video.
Hi everyone, my name is Kelly Antea and I'm the lead field technician on the Ojibway Prairie Reptile Recovery Program at Wildlife Preservation Canada. Our program is based out of Windsor and LaSalle, Ontario, within an area of closely situated nature parks known as the Ojibway Prairie Complex and Greater Park Ecosystem, which is quite a mouthful, so here on I'll be referring to it simply as the Ojibway Prairie. I'll be talking to you today about the site, review on key biodiversity areas, or KBAs. What are they and what do they do? Simply put, KBAs are areas of our planet that are critical for sustaining biodiversity. These areas are identified using standards set by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and for a site to qualify, it must fall into at least one of 6 categories: areas where biodiversity is threatened, areas where biodiversity is geographically restricted, areas with high ecological integrity, areas that are important for biological processes, and areas that are irreplaceable. Areas are assessed on these categories via trigger species, which I'll touch on later in this presentation. While recognition as a KBA does not provide any formal land protection, it does help to provide information about where vital natural systems exist and can inform decisions about natural resource management, land and water use, where development should be avoided, and where to focus strategic land acquisition for the protection of biodiversity. The Ojibway Prairie Complex and Greater Park Ecosystem is a network of natural areas within the city of Windsor and town of LaSalle, 2 municipalities which have a combined human population of roughly 250,000. As a result, a variety of anthropogenic land uses are present within the site, including residential, commercial, agricultural, and industrial. But most importantly, a number of distinct natural areas occur within the proposed Ojibway Prairie KBA boundaries, with a combined total of over 850 hectares, more than 60% of which are protected as municipal or provincial parks. In 1984, the Ojibway Prairie was identified as a Carolinian Canada signature site in recognition of its regional importance as a critical natural area. In 2016, it was We have to further recognize the Ojibway Prairie's importance by securing a KBA recognition, highlighting the significance of the site for a variety of flora and fauna at the national scale. Of the KBA categories I mentioned before, the Ojibway Prairie falls into the very first category, areas where biodiversity is threatened. In fact, it's been said that no other location in the province supports such a high concentration of rare species. This site is home to over 100 provincially rare plants, 252 bird species, 10 at-risk reptiles, and 2 COSEWIC-listed mammals. These numbers aren't surprising when you think about it. Tallgrass prairie and savanna ecosystems were once widespread throughout southern Ontario, but human pressures and development have reduced these ecosystems to isolated remnants. Less than 3% of the historic range of tallgrass prairie remains in Ontario, and only a handful of sites with savanna ecosystems of tallgrass prairie and savanna ecosystems in Canada. It's a pocket of nature, nestled in a part of Ontario where natural environments of all kinds have largely been replaced by intensive agriculture or urbanization, and thus the Ojibway Prairie serves as a last haven for many rare native species. Unfortunately, ongoing threats such as residential development, habitat fragmentation, road mortality, and invasive species remain, highlighting the need for increased recognition, protection, and threat mitigation. The loss or degradation of natural habitats within the proposed KBA site could result in significant declines in the Canadian populations of some species. Our KBA nomination focuses on 11 at-risk trigger species, 3 snakes, and 8 plants. These species were carefully selected based on their restricted ranges in Canada, their conservation statuses, and the estimated number of mature individuals found at our site. Each species must pass thresholds at our site to qualify as a trigger species, including a minimum number of reproductive units and a minimum percentage of the national population. Our species include the eastern fox snake, the largest snake at our site. They are constrictors that prey on rodents and birds. We estimate that the Ojibway Prairie contains roughly 3% of the Carolinian population. Butler's garter snakes are an earthworm specialist, lover of grassy fields, and one of Canada's prettiest garter snakes. We believe the Ojibway Prairie is home to at least 10% of Butler's garter snakes in Canada. The eastern Massasauga is Ontario's only venomous snake. They're quite shy and hard to come by and can be found at only one other location in the Carolinian zone. We estimate this site may house approximately 10% of Carolinian Massasaugas. Dense blazing star is a tall flowering plant found in southwestern Ontario. It's a valuable plant for pollinators, including butterflies, bees, beetles, and hummingbirds. We estimate that the Ojibway Prairie contains approximately 16% of the Canadian population. Here we have pink milkwort and pale purple false foxglove, two more of the many rare plants found at our site. The Ojibway Prairie contains approximately 20% of the populations of both of these plants in Canada. Willow-leafed aster is a locally abundant plant at our site, which is very rare in Canada. While its seeds have a low germination rate, it spreads successfully through rhizomes. We estimate 48% of the Canadian population is contained within the boundaries of our site. Purple twayblade is a small orchid which thrives in prairie, savanna, and other open habitat types. There are approximately 3,300 plants in Canada in any given year. A 2015 survey found 2,110 of these plants in one distinct park at our site, indicating that at least 64% of Canada's purple twayblade orchids are found at the Ojibway Prairie. Prairie rose is a climbing vine-like plant found in open Carolinian habitats. The encroachment of invasives like multiflora rose and autumn olive pose a threat to this species of special concern. Coincidentally, the city of Windsor is also known as the City of Roses. Up to 80% of prairie rose's known area of occupancy in Canada is within the boundaries of the Ojibway Prairie. White-tubed colic root is abundant at our site, with large patches in some areas and a total population of over 6,000 plants estimated in 2015. Seeds of this endangered species were artificially germinated for the first time as part of a habitat restoration works for the Herb Grey Parkway. Excluding these planted individuals, the Ojibway Prairie contains approximately 88% of Canada's white-tubed colic root. Finally, slender bush clover is our one trigger species which can't be found anywhere else in Canada. 100% of this species range occurs at the Ojibway Prairie and is primarily restricted to the less disturbed prairie remnants within our site. In addition to these 11 trigger species, the Ojibway Prairie is home to a wealth of plant and invertebrate species found nowhere else in Canada. During the 2014 and 2015 BioBlitz, 16 invertebrates were found that had never before been recorded in Canada, and one species which had previously been declared extirpated. Another invertebrate species, Loxoscera ojibwayensis, is globally endemic to the Ojibway Prairie. At least 4 other plant species are found here which occur nowhere else in Canada. With ongoing surveys, we expect that there are even more discoveries to come, and this highlights the importance of the Ojibway Prairie. The Ojibway Prairie Complex and Greater Park ecosystem is truly a unique area which has managed to survive despite ongoing urban expansion. The future of the site is by no means certain, and the development pressures continue. For example, in the Windsor-Essex region, we estimated that 13 species of reptiles and amphibians that occurred here historically have already become extirpated from the region. It's up to us to ensure that this area remains protected into the future. If you want to learn more about KBAs, you can visit KBAcanada.org or KeyBiodiversityAreas.org. If you'd like to learn more about Wildlife Preservation Canada and the Ojibway Prairie Reptile Recovery Program, visit wildlifepreservation.ca/Ojibway Prairie Reptile Recovery. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. Jonathan and Kelly couldn't make it today, but they regret that they weren't able to make it, and thankfully we're able to provide a really great presentation there. So thank you to all the speakers today. Robyn, Amanda, great presentations. Thanks for everyone for dropping questions in the chat. At this point, I'm going to allow everyone to unmute themselves and turn on their camera. So if you'd like to do that, please feel free, although you don't have to. And we'll start off and just move to the question period, I think. Amanda, thanks for answering some of those questions already within the chat. I'm going to scroll up to one of them that was asked by Nick Stowe. I think, Robyn, you might be best placed to answer this one. Nick's asking, are the 2 Ottawa sites, the Marlborough Forest and the Brentlands Alvar? And Nick, nice to see you.
Thanks, Peter. I believe they are, but I would have to double check, just cross-reference that on my map, but I think they are. And if you would like to be more involved in these sites, if you don't mind sending me an email or putting your email in the chat, I'd be happy to reach out, because these are sites that are still in very, very early stages. They've just come up in our scoping as potentials, but we haven't made any progress on them. So if you are someone who could help with that, I'd be very interested in connecting and sharing what information we have and running this by you.
Yeah, I can absolutely do that, and I may suggest a 3rd site.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or just chime in. Otherwise, I'll go to another question that's in the chat. Andrea Creston is wondering, I guess this is both for Amanda and Robyn, could you share a list of trigger species?
I could share a list, but it might be worth kind of narrowing it down to whatever purposes you're looking for. And I would just have to run this by some of my team to make sure we're not sharing any sensitive information. But if you do have specific taxa you're interested in or areas, or we can chat more, and we're happy to pull some sort of summary of this together for you.
And then for the birds map, if you go to the birds map that I shared the link with, there is a, sorry, one second. There's a tabs on the left-hand side, and you can actually view bird KBA thresholds. If you open that, it's a table of all of the birds in Canada and all of their thresholds globally and nationally, and how we got their population estimates and everything like that. So if you're interested in looking up a species, you can just search it at the top and it'll come up with all that information.
And I'll just add as well that on the KBA Canada progress dashboard for the non-bird sites that we're scoping, if you click on the sites as well, it will show the species. So it doesn't have our full list of 1,000, but it would have the 200 that we're kind of focusing on right now.
Yeah, and I think we're happy, like Robyn said, if you want to reach out as well, if you're interested about a particular site, then we're happy to kind of, pull together the list of species that we're looking at. Of course, we'll probably have to remove sensitive species and others that we're not allowed to share, but happy to work together to give a list of species to watch out for over the summer in your own monitoring. Going to a question from Ted Armstrong. In the past, I have noted the huge vacancy in the IBA map for most of Northern Ontario, exclusive of the Hudson Bay lowlands. While the north is large and there are fewer nature observers and thus fewer data, I believe there are areas equally valuable to those identified in other parts of the province. Black Bay along the north shore of Lake Superior is one area that comes to mind. This is a concern if IBAs are going to be a starting point for Ontario KBAs. Any comments on the big northern white space in the Ontario map?
Thank you for that question. And also, I believe someone else asked a similar question about the northern, Doug Tate also asked something kind of similar. So yes, there's like a huge area, mostly I think boreal-ish habitat that doesn't really get covered by IBAs, and it's just because of the, I guess, the nature of the thresholds. So it's a minimum threshold of a population. So because everything like breeding birds and things are so kind of less dense out there, I think they didn't just want to, blanket the entire boreal in Northern Ontario. But that being said, we had some internal staff meetings and some other staff meetings, and Black Bay was actually mentioned as a possible bird, and I think other species, KBA, I'm not sure, Rob, we'll have to confirm that. But so we have been starting to look into that as well. But yeah, I mean, IBAs definitely aren't a tool that just covers everything. They do miss things, and they might be even, that area might even be covered by an ecosystem KBA in the future as well. So there's always that possibility too. I hope I answered your guys' questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I'll just add on as well. Like Amanda said, KBAs are really good at targeting kind of sites that are really particular for species and ecosystems, but not so good at capturing broader landscapes and other things. So there are other tools that will be important for capturing some of these areas. One of the other types of KBAs, though, that might fill in some of those northern parts of Northern Ontario are the criteria C KBAs, or the KBAs that are designated for ecological integrity. So we're still working on methods for those, and we have a ecosystems and ecological integrity coordinator, Lucy Poley, who's on leave at the moment, but will soon be back to keep working on this. But the goal for these sites is that they're really large sites that capture sites that are important for broader landscapes and ecosystem functioning. And so given, the relative intactness of a lot of Northern Ontario, there will definitely be a couple of those sites that help fill in that northern parts of the map of KBAs. But that's still probably a year and maybe a bit further away. Thank you for the question. Paul, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm off muting there. Yes. Just a quick question about the Highlands Corridor. Robyn, I know you were looking at it for pale billet frost lichen. Any updates on that at this point?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, thanks for reaching out. I have some updates. It's one of those things where we're trying to get the best up-to-date information for the species as we can, and unfortunately, it's just in line with the Kosiwik update. But I did receive word from the Kosiwik author a few weeks ago that they're looking into getting us some kind of preprint information. And she said she'd let me know in June. So I will let you know how that goes. And if not, we'll have to wait until the fall when the Kosiwik report is officially released, just because we've heard word basically that the national population has changed. And the new report will reflect this, but I will keep you posted and hopefully we can move forward with the site and know one way or another soon.
Okay, just a question in terms of ecological integrity, that criteria, does the Highlands Corridor, is there a consideration for that at that level? Because
yeah,
is about ecological integrity, the connectivity of the 3 provincial parks. I'm just wondering if that's meeting that criteria or would be a flag for it.
Yeah, that's a great question. The ecological integrity sites are meant to be quite large. So the Global Secretariat at the moment recommends that they're at least 10,000 square kilometers. So that narrows out a lot of sites in southern Canada in general. Even if they're important for connectivity, often they're just not quite large enough. But it's something that that we'll look into for sure. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of the criteria for KBAs don't really target connectivity specifically. They do in some ways, and as we delineate sites, it's definitely a consideration to some extent, but there will have to be a lot of other tools that we use in conjunction with KBAs to really target things like connectivity. Biocultural values are another thing that aren't really explicitly captured by KBAs, but which will be really important to consider. Thanks for the question, Paul.
There's one question that I think we kind of skipped over from Cynthia. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I just saw that one as well. So Cynthia is asking, does WCS envision protected areas closed to the public to ensure KBAs are sustained? Thanks, Cynthia, for the question. I can give a first stab at that, Robyn, unless you want to tackle it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, yeah. So yeah, thank you, Cynthia. So WCS Canada and Birds Canada and NatureServe at the moment, we're really focused on identifying the KBAs and kind of making the information on where these areas are available to the public. The key biodiversity areas themselves don't come with any automatic protection. They don't come with any prescriptions in terms of management or how people can access land. So when we designate the boundaries on an area and map them out, they don't bring any automatic protections or restrictions. It's really a matter, the KBAs are an information tool, and so people can use that information in the way that they think is best. And the idea is that we certainly hope it's used to, create protected parks or highlight existing stewardship efforts or help attract funding or other things. But in terms of kind of particular approaches and strategies in different areas, WCS Canada or the other KBA partners, I don't think we have any specific goals or objectives for that because it'll vary so broadly across sites. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to chime in if it doesn't, but thanks for asking. Anything you want to add on, Robyn or Amanda?
I think that covered it. Thanks, Peter.
Super. Nick, I see you have your hand up. Feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I can think of a couple of sites potential sites that straddle, particularly if we're talking about the larger ecological integrity criteria that straddle the Ottawa River. Is there an issue with sites that straddle the boundary between Ontario and Quebec? I know that's often the issue of bringing in Quebec sites is often a problem.
Yeah, thankfully not with the KBAs. We have a couple of sites that are we already expect will kind of cross over. Definitely in terms of IBAs, the Ottawa River Lac des Chênes IBA in Ottawa does cross over into the Gatineau side as well. And there are a couple of other KBAs and IBAs across the country that are kind of straddling the border of at least 2 provinces. So yeah, not a problem as long as it's not a problem from the species perspective, it's generally not a problem from the KBA perspective.
Okay, thanks.
So other questions in the chat? Anybody else, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and chime in if you have a question. But I'd like to go back to Doug's question in the chat, just Robyn, to hear your perspectives on that. Doug was asking or saying he's heard talk of a possible KBA proposal for the north shore of Lake Superior, not the deep water one for Key and pygmy whitefish, but a shoreline shallow water area. This may be based on importance for staging waterfowl, perhaps, but did not show up in any of the Ontario IBA maps. Can either of you, I guess Robyn or Amanda, you kind of covered this already, but you want to add anything to that?
I know from our perspective, we did meet with some Thunder Bay naturalists and biologist groups. And I know, Doug, we've chatted about the lake a bit as well. And I'm not seeing anything that's definitely going to trigger on our end in that area. There are some fish in the area, but they're more widespread along the shoreline, so along multiple shorelines, so it's a bit harder. But if you do have any specific non-bird suggestions, send them my way. And I have it on my radar because I know I've had a few people suggest sites along northern Lake Superior, but as Amanda mentioned, it's a bit trickier in that area of the province because things are just a bit further spread out and less concentrated in individual sites.
Yes, and but if there is staging waterfowl and you know of data, or you know how to get data, or we can work together. You can definitely reach out to me to try and nominate a new KBA for birds as well.
Thank you both. Just looking at the time, we're coming up on the hour, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we'll continue on until 1:30, so we'll have a lot more time to discuss and have questions. We'll keep it informal and flowing. But if you have to leave, then feel free. Thanks for joining so much, everybody. We will be recording the talk, and if you're registered to the Eventbrite, you'll get a link when it goes live. Otherwise, you can look for it on our website, kbacanada.org. Thanks for joining. Our emails are in the chat as well if you'd like to scroll up and see those, and we'll copy and paste them again. But thanks for joining if you have to leave. Otherwise, we'll continue on with some other questions. So I see Shelley asking a question about how ecosystem integrity will be applied. So let me take the first go at this question. So yeah, great question. We're still working out the methods for ecosystem integrity. And as I mentioned, we have a coordinator specific to that role who's kind of developing some of the methods on that. I think we have, yeah, so it's still very much in development. The idea for these ecosystem and ecological criteria, or for the ecological integrity KBAs, is that within WCS Canada's ecoregions, we're allowed to designate 2 sites within each ecoregion. And so within the northern Canada, there will be quite a few of these areas that will be around 10,000 square kilometers. And so at the moment, our coordinator is working on kind of figuring out how exactly you pick out a site in some of the relatively homogeneous and relatively undisturbed areas of northern Canada. So it's methods that are still very much in development. If you'd like to be involved, if you'd like to find out more, do reach out, and we'd be happy to involve you in those discussions. Going down to another question from Catherine. Are there key priority needs? How can researchers be of use beyond data collection? And yeah, Amanda and Robyn, do you want to start off with either of those first?
I can jump in. I know I've been in touch with Catherine before, so thanks for the question. It is really great, Catherine. I know you provided some mussel information for the pseudonym, so that's really super useful information. We use reports, government reports, and different data sets, but we really need people to confirm that this information is still current and correct. So that's where having researchers such as yourself involved is really important. I think another way yourself or other researchers could be of use would just be providing technical reviews. And Catherine, I think I actually do have you on my list for the East Sydenham review, and you can always, it's just an opportunity to comment. You don't have to if you don't have time, but this is always great. And then the third way I can think of is connecting us to anyone else in the area that might have expertise. And also just ensuring that we know which stakeholders and rights holders in the area should be contacted. So any sort of networks you have in the area, just notifying them of our work is always appreciated as well.
Yeah, same kind of answers for me. And also another one, our process is a little bit different because we're reassessing old sites. So we didn't really need to go through delineation, but we still want to make sure that bird sites are still appropriate and the data is okay. So reviewing and also sending on contacts, or even sending the map that I linked to anyone you think would be interested in specific IBAs or KBAs would be great.
Thank you both. So I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. If anyone does have questions, please do chime in, either drop them in the chat or unmute yourself and feel free to ask away. We can stand by for, we don't have to stay the entire until 1:30, but if there are no questions, but definitely we don't want to cut the conversation short at all. So if you have sites you're interested in, species you want to know if we're working with or considering, if you have groups that you think should be involved, or your group that wants to be involved, do chime in, drop it in the chat, or let us know. And I'll drop again everybody's email from today. Oh, there you go. Robyn's dropped hers in the chat. Perfect. Okay. So the emails are all in the chat as well if you'd like to follow up with anybody here. I'll note too for Shelley, a comment from Kira Rutza-Perrin, who's our KBA Canada Director at WCS Canada, just to add on to your question about ecosystem criteria and ecological integrity. So Kira says, Shelley, you can reach out to me for more information on ecological integrity sites. The methods are developing well and have been discussed across the global community. Canada is taking a leading role on indicators of ecological integrity, but it's slow to get consensus on approaches. There are experts across the country that have contributed to methods so far. We've scoped out potential sites across northern Canada, and now we're moving to a regional approach to get regional expertise and input from Indigenous communities. This is on pause, though, as we wait for the coordinator to return from leave. But Shelley, I hope that adds to the response. Please do reach out to us if you want to be involved. We're happy to talk more about this. I'll drop again in the chat as well some of the maps that were talked about today, some of the interactive maps, so you can see the IBA-to-KBA crosswalk map here in the chat now, and then the interactive map of new KBAs that are in progress. As somebody's mentioned in the chat, these maps are a little bit different just for historic reasons. Our birds work and the other work is kept a little bit separate. We're really looking forward to this October when we'll have a launch of our new updated website, when for the first time all this information will be together in a single spot. But for now it's a little bit separated. So if you're interested specifically in birds, check out that IBA-to-KBA crosswalk website. If you're interested in other species, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, invertebrates, everything else, check out the other website. And yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Not a problem. I'm not seeing any other questions. So I think we might just call it a day. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Robyn, Amanda, for the updates. Thank you very much, Jonathan Choquette and Kelly Antania for the wonderful presentation and video as well. It was really exciting to hear about Ojibway Prairie Complex, a really exciting KBA and one that should be on everyone's bucket list of spots to visit for sure. Everybody else, thanks for joining. Really appreciate all the support and seeing all the familiar faces of people who've contributed to the program so far. Do always feel free to reach out if you want to talk more or if you want to hear about more sites. Otherwise, thank you, everybody, and hope everyone has some time to explore KBA near you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.